Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Emerging Technology Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Seraphin, the Deputy Director of the Emerging Technologies Institute at the National Defense Industrial Association. And you may have noticed, if you've been following the video version of the podcast, that we're not in our traditional Arlington studios today. Today, we're on location at Sophic TV here at the Special Operations Forces Industry Conference, which is one of the large NDIA conferences run around the country. We're hoping that we have an on the road or expeditionary series of podcasts where we can go out to NDI events all over the country and bring you exciting new guests in the science and technology and innovation space, supporting our defense industry, supporting our warfighters. Today, I'm very happy to have with me Mr. Chad McCoy, who is the VP and co-founder of Firestorm Labs, formerly the director of the Doolittle Institute here in Florida. And before that, a long and distinguished career with the Air Force in special operations. I'd love to, today we're going to talk about his work at Doolittle, how he's worked with Special Operations Command, especially how he's tried to work to support new and small businesses to enter into the defense space and work with Special Operations Command to get the best technologies in the hands of the warfighter. So with that, welcome, Chad, to this Emerging Technologies Horizons podcast.
Thank you very much.
So let's just start with basics for the audience. Can you tell us what the Doolittle Institute is and how you work with SOCOM?
Sure. I feel like I should talk about why I'm sweating. It's not because I'm nervous. It's because it's 100 degrees outside and I'm wearing jeans and a sport jacket.
We're in beautiful Tampa, so it's good sweat.
Yeah. So hopefully I'll stop in the next few minutes. So the question is about Doolittle and its relationship with technology. And so I spent the past year post-military really immersing myself in the tech space, specifically supporting the research lab, AFRL, at Eglin. And so their specific mission is to develop new munitions. You have the PEO weapons down there as well at Eglin. And so they basically have the whole weapons portfolio for the Air Force. And so I had a pretty interesting development into that role. I came from a ground end user of technologies, of the guy asking for bombs to be dropped to support ground forces, to go into the guy who's bringing in small businesses to potentially iterate on components, or bring academia in to do basic research with the lab, with CRADAs or some other established agreements. And so I had to learn very quickly all of the different mechanisms in place to build arrangements to bring companies in to license technology and patent, as well as spinning technology out and sometimes spinning it in as well.
So Doolittle has got a particular kind of agreement with the government, I believe, called a Partnership Intermediary Agreement. We've heard a lot about FAR-based contracts, CRADAs, other transactions. Not a lot of people know what a PIA is.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So it was new to me as well. People were using it in normal vernacular. I had to quickly catch up. The Partnership Intermediary Agreements exist to facilitate that outside the DoD space, to bring in small business, academics, in and out of technology spaces. And so specifically with the research labs, you have 5 institutes which fall under those Partnership Intermediary Agreements. Those intermediaries exist not to circumvent the FAR system, but to expedite the process. And at times, we fall into some of the same bureaucracy that, the FAR-based system provides, even outside the wire, and outside the wire being an industry. And some of that becomes or is cause of scar tissue of the speed of process on the outside. But I think a lot of the industry leaders and military leaders are now understanding that that's essential to really compete within the technology space. Some of the things,
and that's one of the things that our new CEO, David Norquist, former Deputy Secretary, talks about. We're competing against a country that's really good at central planning, and we're not going to out central plan them. We're not going to out government them. They're good at that as well. It's going to be our partnerships, our innovation, our industry, and our ability to break down the barriers between those sectors that's going to let us get ahead. And so I guess the way I think about these PIAs is there a way to break down those barriers?
They are. And innovation is an overused concept. I think everyone's their eyes roll over when they hear innovation. Innovation is predicated on failure and taking risk, right? And so can you do that within the DoD space? You can, but it takes a lot more appetite for, to really fall on your face. And what I've seen from my personal experience in the military is that, command tours exist within 2-year blocks. and you're really judged within your that trade space of 2 years of how well you can do, and maybe not, or keeping things on the rail. But industry doesn't take the same approach. And so if you go to Silicon Valley, they very much want to break glass along the way. They definitely want to see what goes off the rail and what fails, and fail fast, right? And so to inculcate that mindset into the military infrastructure, as well as contracting, is the long game, I think. And I think that the PIAs exist as a mechanism to provide that. It really depends on the customer too. And so, if the customer is forward leaning and says, I'm going to trust you to go really fast with this amount of money, and I want you to bring in all these great companies, knowing that you might get return on investment on one company, that's where we need to be. And that's where that space really can thrive.
So now if I'm a small business and I want to work with SOCOM, is working with Doolittle and the PIA a way to get there? And how should I think about that relationship if I'm the small business?
Well, I'll give you some history. So SOFWERX, everyone's familiar with SOFWERX, everybody loves them. SOFWERX grew out of the Doolittle Institute. And so the origination of Doolittle was the original PIA. And it grew as requirements grew outside of the Eglin infrastructure. So Tampa said, hey, look, this is a great concept. We would like to have one as well. And as it grew bigger and bigger, DefenseWERX emerged from that. And so DefenseWERX is the parent company. They continue to grow hubs. A recent hub they just stood up was ICWERX. And so working with the folks within the Intel community, DHSWERX, and it just, the list goes on and on, right? And so people realize the value. But your question was, how does Doolittle fit in this?
And how does the small business,
Sure.
right? So you're not a prime.
No.
And I shouldn't worry about you taking my IP. So what does
candidly,
Doolittle do for the small business?
And as you know, I recently stepped down as director to pursue other opportunities. But we weren't pushing the primes away. We definitely wanted to play with them when it was appropriate. But our focus is the small business, the non-traditionals, the folks that would never have access to the DoD space. It could be two guys in a garage tinkering on a sensor. They don't know where it fits, and they don't know where the access point is to talk to the right scientist within the lab. This is the access point. And so it might come in an innovation discovery event, which is focused on a certain technology area, or it really could come as simple as coming onto the network and saying, hey, I'm here. I want to participate. Call me if you have a project that meets my my specialty.
So given your background as an operator, what do you think were the biggest challenges in getting the operator's voice heard in the acquisition system, in the technology development system?
How long do you want to talk for 20, right? So this is near and dear to my heart because I worked at a special mission unit at Fort Bragg, and we had research and development monies. Were we doing research and development? Probably not in the sense that you or I understand on this side, but there were tons of requirements coming from the operators that were generated at the tactical level that never met daylight because senior leaders had to prioritize those. And so you can't say there's 20 priorities, we're gonna have funding for all of them. It's usually the top 3 to top 10. And if that priority doesn't meet with the commander's vision or commander's priorities, it's not making the cut. And so a lot of the really disruptive technologies, potentially disruptive technologies, exist in this space that COT solutions come in and solve the answer the mail. But a lot of those ideas, those seedlings, potentially die because they don't get watered. And so I think that's the biggest value proposition for this conversation, for the PIAs, for the institutes, for the workses. And candidly, SOCOM is the petri dish for that because it's not at scale, right? People say SOCOM has so much money per capita per operator. Yeah, it's disproportionate to an 11 Bravo and an infantry, but it's an economy of scale as well. And so SOCOM is very cheap comparatively for the return on investment. But the ideas that are generated within those smaller, whether it be a SEAL platoon says, hey, we need this, hook and climb mechanism and it needs to be carbon fiber. Can you solve that? Absolutely we can. Are you ever going to get those requirements, from the big Navy? Probably not in the same way.
So the, here at Sophic, we have about 15,000 people. I'm going to venture to say most of them are actually small businesses, not so much primes. And it's because of the unique nature of that soft market. And I also think it's probably because of the agility of the soft acquisition system, which you're kind of describing. But let me put you on the spot then. You're not government anymore. You're not even Doolittle anymore. If there was something you could change to increase the voice of the operator in the system, what do you think it would be?
Well, so I'm going to look a little bit broader than that, right? I'm going to look at, the user, the end user, and it doesn't have to be an operator, because operator-centric problems exist within, kind of a smaller scale, right? Let's say you're a pilot and you have a unique concept that you want to see matured. How do you voice that? And so, AFWorks, they have the Spark Tank, they have some mechanisms to get ideas to potential innovators or problem solvers. But really it comes down to, I think, if I was king for a day, to have whiteboards everywhere that you put hard problems on. And if you're a small business, you come by, you're like, oh, I have the answer to that. I've been working on that, and I just didn't know who to talk to. And having
Can you do that in an unclassified way?
I think you can. And I think it becomes almost like a social media model where you're saying, hey man, I'm trying to think of a unique technology that fits within this that I can talk about. But, if I'm I want a nut that drops a bomb off that much quicker. And it's pretty simple, but I just don't know what, manufacturing company to talk to. That should exist within a social media platform, a lot like some of the DoD platforms that have, but it needs to be unified. It needs to be a unified voice, because that might exist within the Navy and the Marine Corps, and across the Army as well.
So you also said you had some background with the laboratory system. AFRL is all over the place. You were at Munitions Directorate, I guess, working with them down over at Eglin. What do you think is the role of that part of the DoD system, the laboratory part of the system, in kind of pushing the kind of technology development, technology transition you're talking about?
Yeah, so technology transfer was a new concept to me, because you're talking about licensing and patents, really dry reading material to me. But I realized that, that's how you incentivize scientists to push these technologies back into industry. An overplayed technology transfer example is, GPS technology. Everyone says that as the example. My question is, well, what's the most recent example of something that's relevant, that means something to me? And, I think, and this is the approach that I took as director, is that if you start to go through an ideation concept or mature an idea, the technology transfer folks need to be in there in the initial stages to determine if it's a novel technology that they can pursue. So you're not wasting time on the back end. Not every technology can be patented and spun out and licensed and to make money. But let's determine that very quickly. Let's professionalize that process a little bit better, so that the scientists can make some money and incentivize them pushing ideas out into industry.
Do you think the government has the skill sets to do what you're talking about?
That's what I mean. PIAs are a great example of an interlocutor for that. Can they get better? Absolutely. And that's a loaded question, because in any facet of the military or industry, they can always improve, right? And so if it's not constant improvement, you're gonna fall behind very quickly.
So one of the things we're thinking a lot up in Washington about these days is the SBIR program, Small Business Innovation Research Program. Tell us how you worked with that and what role it's played in SOCOM.
Sure. So the BA list just got published from the Munitions Directorate a few weeks ago. I think there's 24 technology areas they pushed out. And then we also have they're doing a SBIR pitch day with the the Armament Directorate, so distinct from the Munitions Lab. Okay, and so those SBIR areas that they provide are generally kind of broad. Obviously, it's a big AI focus, machine learning focus, digital transformation, digital prototyping, all those aspects of the compute power. But this is going to be a good litmus test for, can we get on step very quickly with these really forward-leaning technologies? And another one of those is affordable mass. And so, we hear the term affordable mass, and affordable mass is really, it's contextual, right? So if a hypersonic becomes affordable and it's $1 billion, is it affordable mass? What's that criteria? And so, that's really what I saw as a new entrepreneur, as an opportunity to say, hey, look, can you build something cheaper than that? Can you make it completely modular, open source? And the answer is yes. And so I would love to see technologies like a cruise missile, with a 250-mile range, come down to $10,000 a shot. You talk about the big primes in the beginning, that probably makes them swallow their tongue, because, you're looking at a Hellfire is over $100,000 a shot.
It's a different business model.
Yeah, and so it's a lot of context, and it's probably uncharted territory, because it's a scale issue, not necessarily a couple sales.
So now you've moved into this world of being an entrepreneur, you know the government market better than most. and you
maybe,
still
yeah.
decided you want to work in this space.
Yeah,
So what gives you hope that small businesses can transition what we call the valley of death
sure.
and get to real sales with DoD?
So the first question should be why would you think to do that, and what's your incentive, right? And so I still feel like I am the warfighter. I'm still emotionally attached to all the decisions that happen. I sat in an airport bar watching the withdrawal of Afghanistan with a bunch of people that weren't even watching the TV, and that affected my cohort, my peers, in a way that a lot of people have never experienced. We need to have supremacy as a nation, militarily. And the only way we reach that is by having new innovative concepts. And, if we're afraid of working with the government because of the bureaucracy and the valley of death that you're describing, they're not going to get the best and brightest concepts coming through. And so, when this concept came to me with the two other co-founders, one has a pretty steep background in engineering, 3D printing, and they talk about this concept as a reality. Like it's on the cusp of coming to fruition. And when it does, I think that it avoids the valley of death by being a completely unique capability that really isn't undermining any of the big boys. And so we can play nice in their sandbox, and then provide the warfighter. For context, my rifle, at that unit at JSOC was almost $10,000 for my rifle. I'm talking about a missile that shoots at $10,000 a shot. And so if we can get there, I don't think it will have a hard time crossing over that valley. I think it's going to be a capability that's going to be pretty easy to adapt to maritime platforms and also surface to surface and beyond.
Now you're in a pretty, almost completely defense unique area when you're talking about low cost cruise missiles. Is there a way you think you could attract private capital
Yes,
into this market?
absolutely.
And so what's the pitch to them? What would make them interested
So I think
in supporting the investment?
Well, this application could be stretched to other applications besides blowing things up.
Commercial applications.
It can go to electronic warfare, it can go to sensing, it can go to, delivery, right? Because it's component based, it's modular and open source. And as you say, hey, I want to add this, repeater, maybe it's for search and rescue or something like that. You could stretch your imagination.
So you're building a platform.
It's the platform. But your question was more about venture capital, and for the munitions directorate, venture capital is a task that the PIAs have to look at and how to bring in. But truly, they have the money they need to do the research in the lab. And right now, there wasn't a big emphasis on bringing VC money in. For our play, I think it's incentivized because you can recognize that it's a disruptive capability, and it's very unique. And I hope that as we maybe flirt with a recession in the United States, we will always fight wars overseas. We're seeing that kind of play out in different regions right now. Instability all across the world. It's really it's one of those markets we have to continue to cultivate and help to thrive.
So in an event like Sophic, which brings together these government people, these industry people, small, larges, what's the value of a small businessman going and finding an operator, a SOCOM, and talking to them at an event like this? Or is it a distraction from the business development they should really be working?
I think for some companies, I'm a little bit different because my Rolodex has these folks in it, right? I was walking here just a second ago and saw a little buddy from the command, and so that exists with a guy like me. If you're a small business, you have to actively pursue those relationships. But how do you determine out of the sea of green suitors who is the access point? Usually that relies or lies within the combat development shops, the CDD shops. Maybe it's A5, maybe it's A8 or the J staff. And so knowing where those centers of gravity are and capitalizing off them is really the value prop for an event like this. But for me, I look at it as one, expanding the Rolodex for components, because if we look at making everything COTS as far as the components that go in a system, we need to have that really amicable relationship with all of these different vendors. And so it's kind of a unique position to be in. I don't have a thing that I'm selling. We're going to sell a concept, and it's going to be basically a Lego set that builds, a greater capability.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
People hear about the requirements process. You touched on the requirements process. In trying to build the market for a new and disruptive technology, should the businesses be thinking about that requirements process? Should they be trying to influence it in any way? How do they shape their customer, and how do they shape that future market?
Well, we don't have the same lobbyists that you guys have in DC, so shaping policy is a little bit different. But I think the requirements exist, and you have to play by those rules. You need to understand the vernacular. You need to understand what commander's priority and commander's intent is at every level. And so, SOF has, 4 services, teetering on 5 within that, that structure. And so that's a lot of requirements. That's a lot of commander's priorities. When you look at the Air Force, the chief of the Air Force is saying, hey, look, this is what we're going to get after. Here's how we're going to compete with China and Russia. And then when you start necking it down to your technology space, I'll use munitions as an example. If I'm doing propulsion, you can very clearly see where you fit. And what distances are they looking at to compete? What new fuels are they looking at? And so it's all spelled out there. The playbook's out there. It's understanding how to synthesize that information and make yourself relevant within the conversation.
Thanks for that. And I want to thank our guest, Chad McCoy from Firestorm, and before that with Doolittle Institute. I hope you guys will join us in future ETH podcasts, especially our On The Road series here from Sophic and from future locations. Thanks very much.